Remember when Bob Denver's White Hat and a 3-hour tour became the most watched reruns in history? Behind the lagoon were network sabotage, a concrete tank, and a cancellation no one saw coming. Today, we're counting down 20 weird facts you never knew about Gilligan's Island. Number 20. You know the tune. Every person who has ever owned a television set can hum it without thinking. Just sit right back, and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip. That opening is one of the most recognized pieces of television music ever recorded. Here is what nobody talks about. The song was not written out of love for the show, it was written as a negotiating weapon. CBS President James Aubrey insisted that every single episode begin with scenes explaining how the castaways got stranded in the first place. His thinking was that casual viewers needed a weekly reminder. Creator Sherwood Schwartz knew those scenes would kill the comedy before the episode even started. He needed a solution that made Aubrey's demand structurally unnecessary without directly refusing it. Schwartz and composer George Weil wrote The Ballad of Gilligan's Isle over a single weekend, loading the entire premise into 60 seconds of opening credits. If the song explained everything, the exposition scenes were redundant. The Wellingtons cut the season 1 vocal. CBS accepted the finished song, and Aubrey's demand quietly disappeared. The theme exists because Schwartz had to outmaneuver his own network before they could damage the show. Every time that opening plays, Schwartz is winning an argument, and that argument was bigger than just a catchy tune. The name of the boat itself was another act of creative revenge, aimed at an even bigger target. Number 19. The little charter boat bobbing in the opening sequence seems like a throwaway detail. It is anything but. Schwartz named the vessel after FCC Chairman Newton Minow, whose 1961 Vast Wasteland speech had put enormous pressure on network television. Schwartz blamed Minow's regulatory crusade for giving broadcasters like CBS dictatorial power over creative content. Naming the boat the SS Minnow was his response. Not subtle, not polite, and exactly the kind of thing that would slip past network executives who never connected the dots. Schwartz confirmed the jab directly in his memoir Inside Gilligan's Island and in Television Academy oral history interviews. He deliberately added an extra N to the spelling. Minow himself later told NPR that Schwartz decided he would get even with me by naming a boat, and acknowledged it with more grace than most people would have managed. Minow even called the naming the best known thing I have ever done. Think about what that means. Every single episode of Gilligan's Island opened with a visual protest against federal broadcasting regulation, baked permanently into the title sequence. That wrecked little boat sitting in the lagoon for 98 episodes was a running editorial comment in television history's most cheerful setting. The next time the minnow rocks in those waters, you are watching Schwartz make a policy argument. Schwartz picked his cast with the same precision he applied to naming that boat, and his first choice for the title role walked away. Number 18. Bob Denver's version of Gilligan is so completely embedded in television memory that it is almost impossible to picture anyone else stumbling across that lagoon. But Schwartz did not go to Denver first. His initial choice was Jerry Van Dyke, Dick Van Dyke's younger brother, who was building his own career in the early 1960s. Schwartz wrote in his memoir Inside Gilligan's Island that Van Dyke seemed just right as Gilligan and offered him the role directly. Van Dyke's response was brutal. He reportedly called the pilot script the worst thing I'd ever read and turned the job down flat, fearing that playing Gilligan would typecast him permanently in buffoon roles. Instead, he took an NBC series called My Mother the Car, a show about a man whose deceased mother is reincarnated as a 1928 automobile. My Mother the Car lasted 1 season, was immediately canceled, and was repeatedly ranked among the worst television programs ever made in subsequent decades. Schwartz wrote that every time they encountered each other afterward, Van Dyke never fails to bemoan the fates that denied him the starring role in Gilligan's Island. That is a long time to carry a regret. The rejection that felt like self-protection turned out to be one of the most consequential miscalculations in television history, and it freed Bob Denver, still stuck in Dobie Gillis reruns, to give the role everything he had. Not every castaway was spared their own version of that moment. Number 17. Tina Louise, gliding across the beach in an evening gown she apparently packed for a 3-hour fishing trip, is one of the show's foundational images. That performance almost belonged to someone else entirely. When the producers conceived Ginger as a Marilyn Monroe-style movie star, they offered the role to Jane Mansfield first. Mansfield was guided by her fiancé, Matt Cimber, and after considering the offer, she turned it down. The fear reportedly was exactly the kind of typecasting Mansfield spent her career trying to escape. Taking on a glamorous screen siren stranded on a desert island felt too close to the persona she was already fighting against. With Mansfield out, casting director Ethel Wynant contacted Tina Louise, who was then starring opposite Carol Burnett on Broadway in Fade Out, Fade In. The production had to buy out her stage contract to get her. Louise accepted. Her agent, according to TV historian Jeffrey Mark, had told her that Ginger would headline the series. Louise reportedly read 10 pages of script and immediately asked why, if the show was supposed to be about her character, Ginger had barely said a word. The role Mansfield refused because it would typecast her became the role Louise spent decades arguing had typecast her. That is one of television history's quietly perfect ironies. Every Louise entrance carries the weight of a Broadway contract that had to be dissolved to make it possible. Number 16. The 7 castaways feel inevitable now. Russell Johnson explaining physics with coconuts and bamboo. Don Wells wholesome and capable in pigtails. Alan Hale Jr. filling every frame with physical presence. None of it was predetermined. The audition room for Gilligan's Island was full of people who almost became different cultural icons in completely different places. Carol O'Connor auditioned for the skipper. Schwartz felt he lacked warmth and passed. Schwartz later joked that O'Connor was delighted the role escaped him, since it left him free for All in the Family and Archie Bunker. Raquel Welch read for Mary Ann. Schwartz called her just too sophisticated for a Kansas farm girl raised on a ranch. Welch's particular quality was exactly right for a different kind of screen mythology, which she found shortly afterward. Dabney Coleman auditioned for the professor and reportedly bombed. On the casting that worked, Don Wells beat out Pat Priest, who later joined the Munsters for Mary Ann. Russell Johnson was initially reluctant to audition at all and had to be pushed by his own agent. Johnson would go on to become one of the most beloved members of the ensemble, a role he treasured for the rest of his life. Think about how close this show came to having an entirely different lineup. One good audition in the other direction, and you are watching a completely different television landmark. Number 15. The 7 castaways standing together in the opening feels fixed, permanent, inevitable. That lineup took 2 attempts and a complete cast overhaul to assemble. The unaired November 1963 pilot, titled Marooned, starred John Gabriel as a school teacher-type professor, Kit Smythe as a red-haired secretary named Ginger, and Nancy McCarthy as a blonde sidekick named Bunny. None of them appeared in the aired series. CBS rejected the pilot entirely. Schwartz went back and retooled. He reconceived the female characters into a glamorous movie star and a wholesome farm girl. He recast the professor as a full polymath scientist capable of solving any problem with available island materials. Editor Larry Heath cut a retooled version in February 1964, which tested through the roof with audiences. The show was finally on its way. CBS executive Hunt Stromberg Jr. forced multiple re-edits between the rejected pilot and the final broadcast version. Schwartz paid for reshoots and recuts out of his own budget. The original pilot sat in a vault for nearly 30 years before TBS broadcast it on October 16, 1992. The season 1 opener, 2 on a Raft, reuses footage from the unaired pilot. If you know where to look, you can briefly spot traces of the original cast in the background before the show cuts away. The formula that feels so obvious in retrospect required a failed pilot, a complete cast replacement, and 2 full years of development to reach your television screen. Number 14. Most viewers know exactly one Gilligan's Island theme song. The Schwartz and Weil ballad the Wellingtons sang is so thoroughly embedded that it is hard to imagine anything replacing it. But the unaired 1963 pilot opened with a completely different theme, a calypso number composed by a musician credited as Johnny Williams. That is the same John Williams who later scored Jaws, Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Schwartz wrote the pilot lyrics himself and, according to Paley Center credits, sang the demo impersonating calypso artist Sir Lancelot. The lyrics described a 6-hour ride rather than the 3-hour tour that became famous. Williams also composed incidental music for season 1 of the aired series before Gerald Fried replaced him for seasons 2 and 3. When the show was retooled after the pilot rejection, the calypso theme went with it. Schwartz and George Weil wrote the ballad version that defined the series, and Williams moved on without dwelling publicly on his Gilligan credit. The season 1 underscoring, however, carries early Williams DNA. 4 years before he scored Valley of the Dolls, and nearly a decade before Sugarland Express launched his film career, John Williams was writing Shipwreck Calypso for an unaired CBS pilot. That pilot wrapped on a specific day in November 1963, a day that stopped the entire country cold. Number 13. The opening title sequence of Gilligan's Island Season 1 includes an American flag. It is flying at half-staff. The final day of principal photography on Marooned, shot on Moloa Beach on the island of Kauai in Hawaii, was Friday, November 22, 1963. That was the day President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The half-staff flag visible in the Season 1 title sequence was filmed on or immediately after that day. Honolulu Harbor closed for national mourning, affecting the production's travel logistics. The cast and crew reportedly learned the news while still on location, with radio reports filtering onto the Hawaiian beach set. Schwartz later recounted in interviews the surreal experience of filming a comedy while the country fell into grief around them. That moment of national trauma is embedded physically in the opening of the show. It runs silently in every Season 1 episode, in the background of the title card, carrying a weight that has nothing to do with castaways or coconuts. Freeze any Season 1 opening on that flag, and you are looking at November 22, 1963. The pilot that introduced Gilligan's Island to television history wrapped the same afternoon that American history broke open. That somber start was only the beginning of the trouble the show would face from the institutional machinery above it. Schwartz later reflected in interviews that the contrast between filming a comedy and receiving the news of a presidential assassination was unlike anything he had experienced in television. Number 12. CBS ran promotional ads for Gilligan's Island in 1964 trade publications with the kind of institutional confidence that suggested it had always been the plan. It had not. CBS television president James Aubrey, known throughout the industry as the Smiling Cobra, openly despised the concept from the first day Schwartz walked into the room. At the pitch meeting that included CBS chairman William S. Paley and company president Frank Stanton, Schwartz recalled Aubrey reportedly sitting through the presentation and then folding paper airplanes and flying them across the room to signal his contempt for what he was hearing. Aubrey wanted a completely different show. His vision was a travelogue format, Gilligan and the skipper taking new charter passengers to new locations each week. A Marooned Island sitcom with 7 recurring characters was the opposite of what he wanted. Per Lloyd Schwartz, Aubrey's final word on the subject was a grudging green light, followed by the statement that he still hated the show. The show went into production with its own network president working against it. Aubrey was ousted from CBS in February 1965, while Gilligan's Island was still on the air, amid unrelated misconduct allegations. Schwartz noted the timing with some satisfaction in his memoir. Every episode that aired while Aubrey was still at the network was a small institutional victory. Aubrey's contempt did not end at the pitch meeting. He found a more active way to prove Schwartz wrong. Number 11. The skipper's authority, the boat's prow, the established order of the island, all of it exists because Schwartz survived not just bureaucratic indifference but active institutional sabotage. According to Lloyd Schwartz, James Aubrey greenlit Baileys of Balboa, a show about a bumbling skipper and his assistant operating a charter travelogue service specifically to demonstrate that his version of the premise was better. Baileys of Balboa was canceled after 1 season. Aubrey's proof of concept proved nothing, except that Schwartz had been right. Separately, CBS executive Hunt Stromberg Jr. proposed adding a pet dinosaur to Gilligan's Island as, in his exact framing per Inside Gilligan's Island, our answer to Mr. Ed. Schwartz vetoed it. CBS also mandated scenes showing the castaways packing and preparing for their charter trip, designed to clarify the premise for new viewers. Test audiences hated these scenes. Schwartz recut the pilot himself to remove them, covering the costs out of his own pocket. Every network-mandated element that touched the show was resisted, documented in writing, and eventually defeated. Schwartz preserved his objections in memos that he later reproduced in his memoir. The clean, premise-focused pilot that premiered in September 1964 exists because Schwartz personally fought off a dinosaur. Even within the cast, not everyone believed the show would survive long enough to matter. The most glamorous member of the ensemble took the role entirely certain the pilot would never sell. All right, we're at the halfway mark, and things are about to get even wilder. Before we hit the top 10, I want to hear from you. What's your favorite Gilligan's Island quote or moment? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel grow. Number 10. Mrs. Lovey. Howl clutching pearls on a deserted beach is one of the great running jokes in American sitcom history. The actress playing her never thought anyone would see it. Natalie Schaefer was 63 years old when she signed on. Genuinely wealthy from decades of smart Beverly Hills real estate investments, and fully convinced the whole exercise would amount to nothing. Her agent's pitch was direct. Come to Hawaii on the studio's expense account, film a pilot that will never sell, and return with a nice tan. Her contract reportedly forbade extreme close-ups and any public disclosure of her age. She refused to reveal her birth year for decades. The sold pilot telegram reached her in Mexico, where she was on vacation. Bob Denver recounted in multiple interviews what happened next. Schaefer burst into tears at dinner. Friends at the table assumed someone had died. When they pressed her, she sobbed, "No, the pilot sold." Denver told the story with obvious delight. The cast's most glamorous member had taken the role as a throwaway, a free vacation attached to a project she was certain would vanish quietly. Instead, she stayed in the role for 27 years, appearing in the original series, the reunion films, and public appearances on behalf of the franchise until her death in 1991. Every pearl-clutching lovey scene is delivered by an actress who genuinely never expected you to be sitting there watching it. Number 9. The skipper's booming laugh and absolute physical presence look like things that were always going to be on screen. Getting Hale Jr. to the audition required a feat that most people would have simply given up on. When Schwartz called, Hale was deep inside Zion National Park in Utah, shooting bullet for a bad man with Audie Murphy. He was on location, surrounded by wilderness, and committed to another production. Per Schwartz's memoir and a 1988 on-camera conversation Hale had with Bob Denver, what happened next was remarkable. Hale rode a horse out of the national park. He hitchhiked to Las Vegas. He flew to CBS. He auditioned. Then he hitchhiked back to Utah. The entire round trip was conducted without breaking his commitment to the Murphy picture. Schwartz met him at the door and told him directly, "If you'd like to be the skipper, you are." The formal screen test with Denver that followed was a formality. During the production run, Hale fell from an on-set coconut tree and broke his wrist, then continued filming for weeks without telling the producers. Hale, son of Warner Brothers legend Alan Hale Sr., wore his skipper hat at his Los Angeles restaurant The Lobster Barrel for the rest of his life and never allowed himself to be photographed without it. The skipper's unshakable reliability on screen reflected an actor who literally fought to get to the soundstage. Not every cast member arrived with that kind of dedication. Number 8. Ginger's every entrance is precise, poised, and separate from the group. She floats through scenes at a slight remove from the island chaos around her. There is a completely documented reason for that separation, and it has nothing to do with character blocking. Tina Louise came into Gilligan's Island believing she was the lead. Per TV historian Jeffrey Mark and Schwartz's own memoir, Louise's agent told her Ginger would headline the series. Louise reportedly read 10 pages of script and immediately pointed out that if the show was supposed to be about her character, Ginger had barely said a word yet. Schwartz confirmed in his book that Louise had expected to be the star. The misunderstanding was real, and it had consequences that ran through all 3 seasons. Louise's billing contract mandated her name appear last in the credits, a position of Tina Louise emphasis that came with a cost. It blocked Russell Johnson and Dawn Wells from being named in the Season 1 theme song at all. They appeared in the credits simply as "and the rest," 2 people the show clearly depended on, reduced to an anonymous collective noun. Bob Denver and other cast members reported that Louise sat apart from the ensemble between takes. The friction was real. Ginger's staging, her elegant distance from group scenes, was not always purely a character choice. The billing arrangement she had negotiated created the longest-running act of loyalty in sitcom history. Number 7. The Professor and Mary Ann. That lyric has lived in the Season 2 theme for 6 decades, and most viewers assume it was always there. In Season 1, Russell Johnson and Dawn Wells were listed in the credits simply as "and the rest." That was not an oversight. Tina Louise's billing contract prevented Johnson and Wells from being named ahead of or alongside her, and the result was that 2 of the show's most beloved cast members spent an entire season without their names in the song that introduced them. Bob Denver discovered that his own contract gave him authority over his billing placement. He told CBS he would remove his own name from the theme song entirely, unless Johnson and Wells were credited by name. CBS objected to the expense of re-recording. Denver held firm. The eligibles re-recorded the Season 2 theme, and the rest became The Professor and Mary Ann. Russell Johnson confirmed the story in his memoir Here on Gilligan's Isle. Don Wells confirmed it on the 1995 Today Show. Both spoke about it with visible emotion decades after the fact, crediting Denver's stubbornness as an act of loyalty they never forgot. The star of the show used contractual leverage not to advance his own position, but to get his castmates' names into a song. When you hear The Professor and Mary Ann in Season 2, you are hearing a favor Denver cashed in. Number 6. Gilligan surfacing in the lagoon, always soaking wet, always grinning anyway. Mary Ann and Ginger crossing the palm-lined beach, the Howells gesturing grandly from their patch of sand. The entire visual identity of Gilligan's Island rests on a sense of lush, remote Pacific isolation. That isolation was fabricated approximately half a mile from the 101 Ventura Freeway. After the Kauai pilot, all production moved to CBS Studio Center, the former Republic Pictures lot at 4024 Radford Avenue in Studio City, California. The outdoor lagoon was built at the edge of the property near the LA River Flood Control Channel. It was roughly 4 feet at its deepest. The 101 freeway ran close enough that traffic noise caused constant retakes and ruined recordings throughout the production run. Water temperature reportedly hovered near 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Denver wore a wetsuit under the famous white shirt for every lagoon scene. Denver told interviewers the crew would spend half of their days filming scenes in the lagoon, an experience he described as physically miserable. The tank was drained and refilled multiple times after cast complaints. It was eventually paved over for a parking structure in the mid-1990s. The sunny Pacific paradise that defined a generation of American television was a cold, concrete lot in the San Fernando Valley, with commuter traffic rumbling in the background. Every cheerful splash is a shivering actor performing contentment under Klieg lights. The show survived that concrete reality partly because Schwartz had convinced CBS it was secretly something important. Number 5. 7 strangers arguing, compromising, and finding ways to function together week after week is the basic engine of the show. Schwartz told CBS it was the most important idea in the world. He meant it, and it worked. FCC Chairman Newton Minow's 1961 Vast Wasteland speech had put enormous regulatory pressure on CBS to justify its programming choices to the federal government. Schwartz reframed Gilligan's Island for Chairman William S. Paley as a social microcosm, a deliberate allegory for Cold War cooperation modeled on a 1963 Los Angeles Times article about urban overcrowding and social friction. The sailor, the intellectual, the millionaire couple, the movie star, the farm girl, all American social strata stranded together, forced to cooperate under pressure. Schwartz told Paley that concept was the most important idea in the world today. CBS President Frank Stanton was convinced enough to subsequently mail Schwartz his own Colby College speech on art and social function. The cooperation allegory framing gave Stanton political cover to push the show through Aubrey's resistance. Schwartz maintained this intellectual defense of the series in every major interview for the rest of his life. A daffy shipwreck comedy survived regulatory-era network panic by arguing it was educational television wearing a coconut bra. The island politics you never noticed, who decides, who leads, who defers, are a structured social experiment Schwartz built on purpose. Some of the authenticity behind that experiment came from the real biographies of the people he had cast. Number 4. Russell Johnson's professor is calm under pressure, resourceful in crisis, and steady when everyone else is panicking. That quality came from somewhere real. Johnson was a decorated World War II combat veteran, a B-24 Liberator bombardier who flew 44 combat missions over the Pacific. In March 1945, he was shot down over the Philippines. The crash landing broke both his ankles. He received the Purple Heart. Dawn Wells told interviewers she did not learn about the Purple Heart until Johnson's funeral in 2014, because in all their years together, he was not a bragger. Dawn Wells was Miss Nevada, 1959, raised on a 4th-generation ranching family in Reno, a real-life outdoors girl, practical and capable, which is exactly what Mary Ann required. Alan Hale Jr. served in the U.S. Coast Guard during World War II and was a genuine boating enthusiast. Bob Denver held a political science degree from Loyola Marymount and taught elementary school before acting. Jim Backus appeared opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause in 1955 as his father, a trained dramatic performance that demonstrated serious range hiding under the comedy exterior. Schwartz cast to type, and the actual biographies of his cast quietly reinforced everything on screen. The professor's unrattled competence is a combat veteran's steadiness under fire. Mary Ann's ease in dirt is a ranch kid's muscle memory. Nobody on that island was entirely making it up. Backus's thirst and howl, meanwhile, was not invented for Gilligan's Island. Number 3. Jim Backus and Sherwood Schwartz had a collaboration that started 2 decades before the Howells ever set foot on that island. In the mid-1940s, Backus had developed a blue blood snob voice at Hollywood parties that became Hubert Updike III, a recurring character on NBC Radio's The Alan Young Show, which ran from 1944 to 1949. The writer responsible for much of that material was Sherwood Schwartz. Schwartz had been writing to Backus's wealthy blowhard vocal register for nearly 20 years before he cast Gilligan's Island. Thurston Howell III was essentially Hubert Updike III, relocated from a radio studio to a Pacific atoll. The voice, the phrasing, the comic rhythm were all already there. The 20 years of shared creative familiarity between Schwartz and Backus made Thurston Howell feel completely formed from his very first scene. Because, in the most meaningful sense, the character was. Audiences meeting him for the first time in 1964 were watching a resurrection. Backus was simultaneously the voice of UPA's Mr. Magoo, a character he had originated in 1949 and would continue voicing for decades. Both characters, the pompous millionaire and the obliviously proud nearsighted man, drew on the same fundamental comic instinct Backus had been developing since the late 1940s. Every Howell monologue is Backus performing a character older than the television set you are watching it on. That character was robbed of one more season by a scheduling decision that blindsided everyone who had built their lives around the show. Number 2. Gilligan, the Goddess. The Season 3 finale that aired April 17, 1967, ended on a cliffhanger. Nobody who wrote it knew it was a series finale because nobody had told them the show was ending. CBS programming chief Mike Dan had verbally confirmed a 4th season renewal. On the strength of that promise, Don Wells and Russell Johnson both purchased homes near the CBS Studio Center studio. The writing staff produced a cliffhanger because a resolution was coming. There was no reason to write a rescue. While CBS chairman William S. Paley and his wife Barbara Babe Paley vacationed in the Bahamas, the 1967-68 schedule was being finalized in New York. Gunsmoke was canceled as part of that process. Babe Paley returned from vacation, saw the schedule, and reportedly told her husband she could not bear losing her favorite Western. Paley ordered Gunsmoke reinstated. Gilligan's Island's Monday 7:30 slot was the slot Gunsmoke needed. The cast learned about the cancellation through trade papers while on summer vacation. Houses had already been purchased. Wells confirmed the account to Esquire in 2013 and named Babe Paley specifically. Schwartz's account corroborates it. Some retellings of this story substitute other figures, but the primary documented record from Schwartz and Wells is consistent. A top 45 show, verbally renewed, with cast members already carrying mortgages built on that renewal, was canceled because a network chairman's wife had a favorite Western. The unresolved finale is not a cliffhanger gambit. It is a paperwork accident. Number 1. Ginger's glamorous entrance across 3 seasons of Gilligan's Island is one of the great recurring visual signatures in American sitcom history. It is a performance that belonged to one actress, could not be replicated, and that its own actress spent 53 years in a complicated public negotiation with. Tina Louise declined all 3 NBC reunion films. She turned down Rescue from Gilligan's Island in 1978, The Castaways on Gilligan's Island in 1979, and The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island in 1981. She told NBC the role had damaged her film career. According to Schwartz, she offered to appear in Rescue for a salary the production could not accommodate. Judith Baldwin played Ginger in the first 2 reunion films. Constance Forsland took the role in the 3rd. Louise also skipped the animated spin-offs. She passed on The New Adventures of Gilligan, which ran on ABC from 1974 to 1977, and Gilligan's Planet, which aired on CBS from 1982 to 1983. On the latter, Don Wells recorded the voices of both Mary Ann and Ginger herself. Wells appeared in every reunion production. She served as the franchise's primary public ambassador for decades, maintaining every friendship, attending every convention, honoring the show without reservation, until her death on December 30th, 2020. In December 2020, days after Wells died, Louise publicly reversed the narrative that had followed her for decades. Never true. I loved doing my part. I really loved my character. Gilligan's Island was never supposed to work. The theme song was a network workaround. The lagoon was a concrete tank by a freeway. The cast came from a failed pilot, and the network funded a competing show to prove Schwartz wrong. The cancellation blindsided cast members who had already signed mortgages, and the unresolved finale was never meant to be one. None of it was guaranteed. All of it came together for 98 episodes into something that has run somewhere in the world every day since 1964. If this video surprised you, drop your favorite fact in the comments, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves this show as much as you do. And as always, just sit right back. We'll see you next time.